Hello and welcome. This is Studio Talk. This particular video is part of a new series I'm going to be doing for recording basics, and that's helping those of you out there who may be just getting started with recording in your home studio, and you want to really learn how to do some of the fundamental things. This will be part of a series that I'll be doing over the coming months that I'll push in between my regular videos. So if you happen to be an advanced user, this video may not be for you. It's probably not for you, but you never know. Watch it and find out. But regardless, those of you who are interested in using outboard analog gear, as an example, this is a Clark Technique Pultec style EQ that was given to me quite some time ago. I actually was given two of them by a friend who doesn't use them. And here you can see your typical, analog in and out on the back here that you can use to be able to get signal in and out of it so that you can process that signal through this piece of analog gear. Now, this is just an example. It could be any piece of analog gear. So that's what we mean by hardware inserts. What you're doing is you're telling your digital audio workstation to send a signal out of your computer into your recording interface, and then take your output of that interface, go into the input of your analog piece of gear, and then come out of the output of your analog piece of gear back into another input on your interface. Now, so that's basically creating this round trip that's going to be happening between your computer, your digital audio workstation, using your interface to go back out to your hardware device and then back in. So that way, as an example, if you've got a bass guitar sound and you want to send that out to an outboard compressor means a piece of hardware that is a compressor, and you're going to send it out to that, then you would tell your digital audio workstation and you would assign it a particular I/O. In other words, you would assign a particular out on your interface as the routing for that, and then you would send that out to that compressor, into the input of that compressor, and then out of the output of that compressor back into an available input on your recording interface. Now, to be able to use hardware inserts, you're most likely going to need a minimum of a 4 in and 4 out. And the reason for that is you're most likely going to be using your 1 and 2 outputs on your interface to go to your studio monitor so you can listen to what you're recording and listen to your playback when you're mixing. So typically what that leaves you in, if you have a 4 in and 4 out, is that you have available for 4 inputs and then an additional 2 outputs, being 1 and 2 outputs going to your monitors. So to be able to do hardware inserts, that means you can go out, you can use 2 of those outs. In other words, 3 and 4 on your interface. You can connect those via hardware insert if you want to, or however you want to connect it, but those are optional for you. So typically recording interfaces are created, they're typically either a 2 I/O, 4 I/O, 6 I/O, 8 I/O, and then beyond, all right? And so that's typically how they're done. So that's what you'd want to consider. So that way, if you have a microphone that you want to record your voice with and another microphone you're recording your guitar with, you can go into inputs 1 and 2 of your interface and then be able to leave your inputs and your outputs on channel 3 and 4 available to you for hardware inserts if that's what you're choosing to do. Now, the process is actually quite simple, and what I'd like you to do is, after you watch this video, go and try it, see if everything works properly for you, and if it doesn't, come back to the video and watch it again until you can figure out where along the way things may have gone wrong. Your recording interface is going to use what's called balanced inputs and outputs on the back of it. Even though they look like your typical 1/4 inch jack, as an example, that you might plug a guitar cable in, you cannot use a guitar cable or something like that to be able to patch your analog gear in. You need one that has what's called a ring, tip, and sleeve. These patch cables can be acquired relatively inexpensively, and so you can do that. You can also buy them if you have multiple pieces of analog gear. You can buy 8-channel snakes, which has 8 on one end and 8 on the other, for being able to run multiple devices at the same time. So to be able to set this up, you need to go into your I/O section of your particular digital audio workstation. Today, I'm going to show you how to do this in Cubase. I'm going to show you how to do it in Studio One. I'm going to show you how to do it in Logic as well as Pro Tools. Now, when we get to Pro Tools, I'll remind you of this when we get to that part of the video, but Pro Tools requires you to use the same number input and output. In other words, if you're going out of output 3 of your interface into the input of your piece of hardware, And when you come out of that piece of hardware, you need to go back into the input of channel 3 on that particular interface. You cannot mix those up, whereas the others allow you to do that. I would say as a general practice, it's always best just to use the same number, output and input, when you're doing hardware inserts. It just makes recalling it, especially when you start adding more, it's just much easier. There will be times you may need to mix that up. I've got several examples in my hardware behind me where I do need to do that, but that's a discussion for another day. But general vast majority, whatever output I'm going out of, whatever number output, if I'm going out of output 4, I'm going to come back into input 4 to keep that the same on my recording interface, all right? So let's head over to the computer and I'll walk you through how to set this up within the workstations that I particularly just talked about. Okay, here I'm in Nuendo. Now, the same thing is for Cubase, so don't worry about that. What you're going to do here is identical in Cubase and Nuendo. So I'm going to go up here to my studio and go into Audio Connections. That's where you assign all of your ins and outs of your recording interface. So you go into Audio Connections, and here I'm first just going to start with whatever inputs I've created, whatever outputs I've created, and then over here to do my external effects. In other words, that's what you're going to send out of the interface is the external effects. You're going to go into here, and here you're going to be able to see these are all the hardware devices that I've going in and out of mine. In here as an example, in this WALA2A as an example, that's going out of my UFX Plus, my RME UFX Plus, into MADI 1, and then back in out of MADI 1 in my UFX Plus, because I've also got a Pulse 16. So don't worry about that. I may have probably just given you too much information. Just ignore the fact that you see these right now. Just ignore that they're not there. So what we're going to do here is we want to add an external effect. And from here, here's where you can name it. And as an example, let's say, for example, I've got a brand new compressor. So I'll just name it New Compressor. All right, so now I've named it New Compressor. And right now it defaults to mono in and mono out. In other words, if you've got a single compressor, you're going to be mono. It has one in and one out on it. And that's what we're going to create. So we're going to say OK. Now you can see down here, this is where that new compressor is. And if I expand this by down-clicking that arrow there, it gets me into my send bus and my return bus. Again, the send is the output of your recording interface that's going to go into the input of your piece of hardware. And then the return is taking the signal coming out of the output of your hardware back into your recording interface. So in this particular first column here, it's going to say audio device. If you have multiple devices, you can choose which device you're going to use. I happen to be using RME UFX Plus. So that's going to be my send and my return interface. Over here, these default to just a generic I/O. Ignore this. What you're going to do is click into this box, and it's going to bring up your available I/O. Now, I've got a lot of available I/O on my particular interface, so ignore that. If you only have a 4 in and 4 out, you're likely only going to see analog 1 through 4 as your options right here. Okay, so I happen to know that my analog 7 and 8 are not being used for anything right now. So I'm going to choose to take my send out of my output on output 7 on my recording interface. So that's going to be my output of the recording interface. And then I'm going to choose analog 7 as my return. Again, it's going to go out of channel 7 on my recording interface, into my external hardware, out of my external hardware, back into channel 7 on the input of my recording interface. And so now we have now created a hardware insert. So we can now close out of here. And now we can go back to our particular channel. If we go over here and we want to be able to assign that hardware insert to whatever we have here. Now, I don't have any audio recorded on this right now, but let's just say you see a waveform right here and you want to, let's say you've got a bass track and you want to send that bass track out to that compressor. Whatever's on that audio channel will go out to that compressor and back in. The way to do that is you go into your inserts here and you're going to assign an insert. From here, you down click just like you would a plug-in. And if you go down here to Steinberg, okay, and then you go into external effect plugins, and now you can scroll down here and you're going to see new compressor as an option. So you select new compressor. And then here you can measure the delay compensation. That's another video for another day. I'm just physically showing you how to connect it. Rarely do you ever need to change any of this. It's just fine, and you can leave that alone. And so ultimately, now whatever's on this particular channel will go out. It will go out of the recording interface into the compressor, process that particular channel. That in this example would be a bass. It would process that, and then you would hear that processed effect come back in. Now keep in mind, when you're doing hardware inserts, you're going to need to use a low buffer setting. Otherwise, you're going to get some delay just like you would with your recording. So in Cubase, you'd want to make sure you go down here to Studio Setup, and then from here you can choose your Fireface UFX Plus under your audio system, and then go into Control Panel. See, right now I've got a high buffer setting. So I would want to bring that down to a manageable setting, and that's going to vary on your particular interface, what works best for you. And then now I've got a lower buffer setting, and so now I'm not going to hear any latency as I'm processing that particular hardware insert. So this is how to set up a hardware insert. Okay, so here we are in Studio One. As you can see, I've created 12 tracks here. And let's say, for example, over here in Audio 1, I want to add a hardware insert to that. So from here, you can see over here to the right, I've got instruments, effects, loops. These are where you can assign particular things as inserts to particular tracks. Here we're going to go down to PreSonus, and then we're going to look for a plugin called Pipeline. Pipeline is the plugin that they use to be able to get hardware inserts set up within Studio One. So here you can see a Pipeline Mono and here a Pipeline Stereo. Since we're doing a single compressor, as an example on this, it's going to be Pipeline Mono. So I'm going to drag that over to the channel that I want to put it on, and now this plugin has been placed on Audio 1. Here, like before, we'll name this a new compressor, right? And you'll see here, send is on the left, return is on the right. So this is my send, and this is my return. So ultimately, my send, we're going to go select this, go to Audio I/O Setup, and from here, we're going to add a mono because we're doing a single compressor. And here, we're going to name that new compressor. And that should be available as part of our I/O going forward. And here, we're going to go to Analog 7. So that means it's going to send it out of Analog 7, and we're going to say OK. And that way from here now, I can choose that. So now I've got new compressor as my send, and now we need to go over to our return. And so our return is going to be in our inputs. So I'm going to go to my input, and I'm going to add another mono here. Here we'll say new compressor. And then now, just like before, we're going to assign that to Analog 7. So now that's been assigned to Analog 7. Say OK. Now we can go down and select this. It's now an available I/O option for us. So now we're going out to new compressor. We're sending the new compressor, coming back in a new compressor. So if you wanted to make this very clear as an example, you could also go back into your I/O setup, and that was going to be the send on that side. So my output is my send. And let's go to the end of this and just do an abbreviation for send on my output. And if I go to my input, which is going to be my return, then I could go here and do RTN as an example. And so now it's showing this is my new compressor send and my new compressor return. That may be beneficial to you as you first get started. After that, it's going to be it's really a non-issue because you know that your send is your output and your return is your input, and it'll become just second nature to you. So now at that point, it's going to go out to that hardware compressor. So since we're here, you should really never need to adjust your send. You know, as long as the track you've recorded is properly recorded at the right level, you should not need to adjust your send. And if you find that you're needing to send a hotter signal out to your outboard gear, it's probably because you recorded that too low. But the return, as an example, you want to monitor that. And so you shouldn't really need to adjust this either as an example, but what you would do is most analog gear either has an output level or a makeup gain level, which is basically the same thing. And so you would want to adjust that until you got in other words, the level should match on your send and your return. So you've got a good signal going in and out and you're set at the right levels. Because as an example, if you were to cut a lot of EQ bands, that's ultimately gonna lower the output level of that EQ. So you're gonna need to raise up that makeup gain to make up the difference, or that output. Same thing with a compressor. If you overly compress something, you're going to need to change that output level to get it back up to the level it was before. So as you A/B in those together, you've got comparable levels, all right? So this is how you do it in Studio One. Okay, so here we are in Logic, and the very first thing we want to do is assign our I/O labels. So if we go up to Mix and go down to I/O labels, from here, these are all our various inputs and outputs. Now, I have a lot available in my particular interface. You may only see you're only going to see the inputs available on your particular interface. So here we're using input 7 like we have before. And if we go over here to long name and we click into there, now we can assign it a name. So we're going to do new compressor. And since this is the input, this is going to be the return. So that means the output of the hardware device is going to come back into the input of our interface on input 7. If you notice here, once I hit enter to do that, it took it over to the user. And what this is telling you, instead of saying the default input 7, it's now going to choose and show you the label that the user has assigned, being me. So now we're going to scroll down here until we get to output 7. And now with output 7, we're going to do the same thing. Click in here. We're going to type new compressor. And this is our send, because this is coming out of the interface and into the hardware I/O. Again, my user is selected, so now I'm going to see that as the name. Now we're ready to actually assign that to a particular channel. So we're going to assign that insert to audio 1. So we're going to add just like we would a particular plugin. As an example, if we go down to utility, go over to I/O, and then choose mono, because we have a single compressor we're adding. And so from here, this is where you assign it. So your output, you're going to come down here and choose new compressor send. That's what's going out of your interface into the input of your hardware device. As far as the input, we're going to choose new compressor return. Again, the output of your hardware device coming into the input of your interface. Now you're all set up and you're good to go. That's all there is to it. All right, so here we're in Pro Tools. The first thing we want to do is go up to Setup, go down to I/O, and then you'll see here we've got our inputs, our outputs, our buses, and our inserts. Inserts is what we're going to be working with. If you can see here, the default is to set those up in stereo. Why this sets up that way for the first time, I don't know. The reason mine is like this is I just updated right before this video the most recent version of Pro Tools, although I no longer use Pro Tools, but that's a discussion for another day. But anyway, if you want to change these all to mono, then go down here to the default format, select, and then choose mono, and then select the default. And now it will change them all to mono channels, okay? And the reason you don't see inputs and outputs here, that is because Pro Tools requires you to use the same input and output number on your interface when you are using hardware inserts. So as an example, if you're going to go out of 7, your send is going to go out of 7, you have to come back in number 7 on your audio interface, okay? You've got to be able to do that. So it's as simple as this, just double clicking on insert 7, typing new compressor, and now it's as simple as that. We've now assigned that new compressor as our hardware insert on 7. So it's going to send it out of 7 on your interface into the input of your hardware compressor, and then the output of your hardware compressor is going to come back into the input number 7 of your recording interface. Once you've got that, then it is simple as going up to here, and then you're going to, instead of choosing plugin, you're going to go down to I/O, and here you're going to see new compressor. And that's all there is to it. So now you can close that. You don't need that anymore. And so now it's all set up for you to use your hardware insert in Pro Tools. Very, very, very easy. So hopefully this explains to you how to go about the process of setting hardware inserts. Getting into incorporating hardware into your workflow can be exciting and can be fun. So if you're choosing to go down that road, understand that it's a rabbit hole we all fall into. Look behind me, you can see what I'm talking about. It's kind of an addiction to a certain degree. That said, have realistic expectations for the difference that outboard hardware is going to make in your recording process. It will improve it. There's no doubt about that. But it's not as significant as you may think. It's not a huge, wow, I cannot believe going out to that external hardware compressor versus using a plugin. It's so much better, so much better. That's not likely to be the case. But typically what you're going to find is you will get an improvement, and it will overall affect the overtonality and improve your recordings if you choose to go down that road. But there's nothing wrong whatsoever with staying 100% in the box and using nothing but plugins. So enjoy your hardware, enjoy being able to use it. If you have any comments or questions, put them in the comments down below. Let me know what you think. And as well as if you find this particular video helpful, do me a favor, like and subscribe to my channel. Really helps it grow. But until next time, I hope all of you have a great day. Bye-bye.